Thanks, Jonath, for introducing. Hello, everyone. This is Ronak Shah, your speaker for AZ900. We would be having a true insight to Microsoft Azure fundamentals that we have as per the revised new curriculum. This refresher session is actually a recap, or you can say, giving you a complete insight on how your Azure fundamentals work, what is new and what has been newly introduced in Azure, and this will probably help you achieve your certification with AZ900. So during this particular session, you will be undergoing some extensive demos. You would be seeing a lot of things that we configure in Azure, we set up in Azure, and having an insight of the fundamentals that are essential for you to know from the perspective of what exactly Microsoft Cloud is all about, or trying to reach out to your customers, or may you even consider it from pre-sales perspective. By all means, this particular session is going to be based on the Microsoft official curriculum, of AZ900, and this particular refresher course is going to give you a complete walkthrough of every single aspect we would be touch basing for AZ900. My name is Ronak Shah. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, a solutions expert, and a cloud designer on Microsoft Enterprise IT technologies with 14 plus years of experience. And I would be here to assist you, help you in any manner during the session, or probably post completion of the session as well. My contact details would be something that would be shared with all of you guys to have any queries addressed. Uh, I believe all the participants that we have right now are from Egypt, and y'all are looking for enhancing your skills and your knowledge as far as Azure is concerned, in order to make sure that you can reach out to the market correctly. This particular course precisely is a 2 days course. So we had one refresher session that we ran on 20th of September, and the other refresher session that we are running today. During this particular session of AZ900, we would be touch basing every single aspect of Azure, namely the Azure regions, the Azure geographies, the availability of Azure services in different regions, types of subscriptions that you can have in Azure, and types of services that can be available in Azure, security, compliance, all sorts of SLAs that you need to meet, all sorts of deliverables that you can give to the end customer. May that be in terms of infrastructure as a service, may that be platform as a service, may that be storage as a service, any single thing that we might think of deploying on the cloud. Here in AZ900, we would be taking a summary of the same. The course agenda has been distributed precisely into 4 different aspects. Number 1 is going to be exploring the fundamentals of Azure Cloud, understanding the different variations that we have in cloud, understanding what infrastructure as a service is, understanding what platform as a service is, or software as a service is, etc. Post that, we jump into understanding and evaluating the different core concepts of Azure. So when I say core concepts, I'm talking over here about network, about security, about storage, about identity, monitoring, log analytics, AI, machine learning, a lot of stuff. Things that can be done, the complete potential, I would say, that we talk about over here in terms of Azure, and the things that they can deliver. Uh, Moving further, we would be evaluating the Azure security, Azure privacy, the data centers, the regions, how Azure looks after your data, how Azure maintains the security of your data, and a lot more stuff. And then lastly, we would be moving to understanding the Azure pricing, the Azure support, the Azure models that are available, how you can procure Azure, the types of subscriptions that you can have, and a lot more. The course examination that you might opt for when it comes to AZ 900, the fundamentals would be divided in a ratio somewhere like wherein you understand the basic cloud concepts up to 15 to 20%. The core Azure services comprise the maximum, that is up to 35%. Understanding security and compliance, that is 25 to 30%, and the rest of it is Azure pricing and support. So, precisely speaking, this entire course is actually meant to give you an in-depth walkthrough of every single service that is deliverable in Azure, every single aspect that we can configure over there, and not going much into the technical part of it, but at least the know-how of how these services, understanding the Azure cloud concepts. Guys, while we are trying to understand what Azure cloud concepts are all about, we need to know a lot of things right from the basics. The very first thing would be why cloud? What are the benefits of moving to cloud? And defining the fundamental of cloud computing. We also need to understand the different types of cloud models that are available today across the industry, whether I should go for a public cloud, whether I should go for a private cloud, or whether should I be going for something which is a hybrid cloud. We will be understanding all these aspects out here. The next is understanding the cloud services, that is infrastructure, platform, software, DR, identity, lot of them. Every single aspect today that I deploy over the cloud, which is offered to me as a service, is something which is considered as a cloud service model. So it can either be infrastructure as a service, it can be platform as a service, it can be software as a service, it can be database as a service, it can be DR as a service, it can be identity as a service, it can be security as a service, it can be network as a service, and a lot more. So all these are the granular aspects of cloud that we need to know before we actually start jumping into the core fundamentals of Azure. When we talk about cloud computing, what exactly is cloud computing? Cloud computing is where your traditional data centers, in simple terms, have been moved in the hands of the major cloud hosting providers or in the hands of the major data center hosting providers, namely Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. So when you utilize those services in your on-premise, when the servers, when the network, when the devices, when the hardware, everything is tangible where you can touch, you can feel, you can configure it on your own, you have the complete management control over it. It is something which lies within your own environment. It is a completely, you can say it's completely your ownership. It is completely under your control. Similarly, today things have changed a lot. Today things have moved from what we call the on-premise fundamentals to something called as cloud. Today, I do not look for deploying every single device, every single service physically. Everything today is virtual. Virtualization, hyperconverged infrastructures are the most in things that are working today for any enterprise IT. Whenever I talk about any kind of a network, when I talk about any kind of a storage, when I talk about any kind of a server, the server will be a virtual machine, the storage will be maybe a cloud-based storage, and the networking device is also going to be a software-based device. So when all these services are going to be offered to me as a complete solution over probably web-based control or over a web-based URL, this is something that we call as the cloud computing era. In cloud computing, every single aspect that we implement, every single aspect that we run through is going to be deployed and implemented not within my organization, but with the cloud providers. When we talk about moving to this particular cloud component, we have a very simple URL from where we can implement, where we can manage the entire Microsoft Cloud platform, that is portal.azure.com. We will be taking a good in-depth walkthrough of all the services that we are currently going to understand or we are going to explore over here. And This and that is probably going to give you a complete insight of the lab that we would be doing. It is going to be conducted probably post a couple of slides. Let us first discuss the theoretical aspects, and once that is completed, we will move on to the understanding of the or we will move on to the practical experience of how exactly this can be done. The main reason why people move to cloud today is cloud is simple. Today, rather than me having my mobile device with a probably 128 GB of a storage or a 256 giga of a storage, and then each time that I try to change my device, I try to buy a new device, taking a backup of the device and then again restoring it on the new device is something which is going to get challenging. Today, the smart move is if it's an Apple, I probably purchase an iCloud storage. If it is Samsung, probably I purchase a Samsung cloud storage, or if it is any other Android device, I land up purchasing a Google cloud storage platforms. The next, when I purchase a new device, I simply need to sign in and all my data can be restored over there. Cloud is simple. Apart from being simple, cloud has got multiple fundamentals over here which we need to focus on, and which probably any enterprise IT might look into, and that is first of all the high availability solution and the fault tolerance capacity that the cloud has. Today, if my IT infrastructure is the critical most infrastructure, we might land up configuring a DR site, we might land up configuring a high availability solution, maybe a backup or a cluster or something, and SLA, the uptime assurance of those services or those devices within my environment will only be limited to the extent of what I do, to the extent of what is configured within my environment. Plus, the responsibility completely belongs to me. Plus, I have to make sure that we perform every half yearly business continuity DR drill. We try to make sure that the primary data center goes down and the secondary data center comes up. Solution will be extremely expensive, and a lot more challenges can be highlighted when we talk about a native DR or a native high availability solution that will be configured for any organization on premise. When we move to the cloud, the best part of moving to the cloud is that nothing remains under your control, meaning every single thing with regards to the uptime, with regards to the SLA, with regards to high availability will be completely taken care of by your cloud provider. Today, if I store my data on iCloud, I don't need to bother whether my data is going to be available all the time or not. It's Apple's headache. They need to make sure that my data is completely accessible each time that I try to do that. If I am storing probably my information on the Google Drive, it's Google who needs to look after the availability of my data. What I mean over here again is cloud is simple. You probably procure some part of the cloud, have your services hosted, and move those services typically wherever you want to in a mobile platform, right from one location to another location. Cloud is scalable. Cloud has elasticity. When I say cloud is scalable, the question over here is, let's say you have an application or a database within your organization which is running on maybe a 16 or a 32 giga of memory. By all means, it was satisfying your organization's requirements so far, and now the time has come when you need to upgrade your server. You need to now move it to probably maybe a higher than a 16 core processor. You need a 48 gig of RAM and a lot more in terms of additional storage and IOPS and stuff. The question is, how long would the process take? Maybe months. We need an approval. We need the process to be approved by the management. We need to procure that particular hardware and then proceed with the implementation and upgrade of my hardware over there. When it comes to cloud, as I say always, cloud is simple. You simply click and you're good to scale it up and scale it down based on the requirement of the application or the database. So when I am running at a particular mode, when I am running with a particular hardware, it is easy for me to implement. It is easy for me to control my scalability of resources. Whenever I want, I can upscale them. Whenever I want, I can downscale the resources without any hassle. And the best part is, I will be paying only for what I consume. So it's basically a consumption based model, which is the most important aspect for any organization because they would be saving a lot on the cost front. It is highly elastic. When I say elastic, it's from starting from a 0.75 GB of RAM. What I mean over here is on a 750 MB of RAM up to having highly business critical workloads like SAP and other application databases deployed on a workload VM as heavy as 8 terabytes. That is 8 terabytes of memory. So right from 750 MB of memory to 8 terabytes of memory, it's highly scalable and highly elastic. Depending upon my requirement, depending upon the need of the business, I can have the resources suit that particular application or the database. Global reach. This is something which Azure leads. This is something where Microsoft has put all other cloud providers behind, being the largest, being the cloud provider with the largest coverage across the globe. This is something which we will discuss further. Customer latency capabilities. Again, where over here we are talking about service level agreements. Azure is the one that meets the agreement the most precisely and has the best level of SLA across any cloud provider. We will be discussing this further as well. Agility. Today, if I have my applications which are probably running on some X version of .NET in my on-premise, each time that I think of upgrading that particular application or probably upgrading the framework of that particular application, it becomes a challenge because we don't know whether it might be stable or not. When we put these applications over the cloud, it is agile, meaning today, if my application is running on a specific framework of .NET, I need not bother about it because the next framework, the moment it is released, my application will automatically be made compatible because that's how the cloud works. So in the cloud, apart from advantages like no ownership responsibility, there are multiple other factors also to consider like extremely high scalability and elasticity, high availability and fault tolerance with the best level of SLA that is possible, agility, predictive cost considerations. Based on your consumption, Azure is wise enough to explain, to showcase you what is your projected cost maybe for the next 15 days, next 1 month, next 6 months, however you want to check it. And based on that, probably you can do a thorough cost optimization within your environment to prevent spending unwanted money. Disaster recovery over the cloud, one of the most stable DR solutions because cloud is something which will assure you an SLA like none other. And then you have the security aspect over there. So when I say security over here, what I mean is cloud providers have to be double sure as compared to what you might look into of the customer's data privacy and security. This particular assurance that is given to the customer makes the customer more reliable and the customer can actually consider the cloud provider trustworthy. So keeping those aspects in mind, it is extremely important that security is met to the best in order to make sure that no user data is compromised or no information is leaked out of what the customer has hosted in the cloud provider's environment. When we talk about the economies of the environment being scalable, it is something really very important to know that when I have my on-prem data center or my on-prem IT infrastructure, how would I move it to the cloud? Trust me, guys, it's extremely simple. You can move your hypervisor-based virtual machines to Azure. You can move VMware-based virtual machines to Azure. You can move your physical servers to Azure, that is converting your physical to a virtualized platform, and everything can be done in the most simple manner that you can imagine. Capital expenditure versus operational expenses, that is something which is the biggest consideration when it comes to the cloud. Since cloud is something which is a service that will be consumed, which is a consumption based model, 90% of the expenses that we talk about over there are going to be operational expenses and not capital expenses. Whereas when we talk about an on-premise physical data center, a native physical data center, the upfront investment is going to be really high, because what we would be investing on is going to be completely our ownership, and we will be handling those physical infrastructure, physical servers, physical storage, network, etc., and the complete responsibility lies with the end customer. So when we talk about cloud, there is probably, you can say, no capital expenditure, because everything is on a consumption based model, which is called as a pay as you use model. So as I said, consumption based model, it actually means that you only pay for the resources that you use. What do I mean over here? It means, let's say for example, I have a virtual machine with a 16 GB of RAM. I use it for a month. A month down the line, probably I feel that 16 GB is something that is not required. I might want to stick to just 8 GB of RAM. Then I can downscale it to 8 GB. So probably for the first 30 days that I used at 16 GB, I pay at 16 GB. Once I am done, I probably wish to then continue at 8 GB, I pay at 8 GB. So it's a consumption based model. It depends on what you use, and depending on what you use is what you pay. Any cloud provider today is adapting the consumption based model. Otherwise, it becomes extremely difficult for the cloud provider to survive in the market. And when it comes to this consumption based model, since Azure belongs to Microsoft, since Microsoft has largest customer coverage across the globe who are already utilizing the products and the licenses, Microsoft Azure becomes one of the cheapest solution where you can deploy all your cloud resources, because you get an extreme benefit of saving cost of up to 49% because of your licenses, the licenses that you already have in place. When we talk about cloud, there are typically three types of cloud services. There are three types of cloud components that we can think about. First one is the public cloud, which is like the cloud provider that we're talking about, like Microsoft over here. The very first one is Microsoft Azure. Probably you can even talk about AWS, Google Cloud, Oracle, AT&T, DigitalOcean, Alibaba, lot many. In the UAE, in the Gulf region, the maximum coverage is with Microsoft Azure being the best cloud provider with the highest and the most efficient possible local availability. So public cloud providers are the ones which provide resources and services to multiple organizations and users, and they are the ones who cater services to any and every segment of customers. They are accessed via a secure network, may that be a site-to-site VPN, or may that even be over the internet, which is not recommended, but yes, it is possible to do that. The next type of cloud provider that we have is a private cloud provider. A private cloud is something which an organization hosts within its own data center. Organization creates its own cloud environment, and they are responsible for operating and managing the services inside that cloud itself. The most prominent type of cloud that we use today is the hybrid cloud, which is a combination of a public cloud as well as a private cloud. Meaning, I can have my on-premise VMware environment, which is created to host all my virtual machines, which is a private cloud. At the same time, I can have a Azure service, which is procured for deploying public cloud. And the collaboration between such a cloud provider and the on-prem VMware environment is something which will be called as a hybrid cloud. So typically, when we compare all the three cloud providers, guys, public cloud has got no capital expenditures to scale up. It is something wherein everything can be quickly provisioned and deprovisioned. It's a consumption based model. Private cloud is which will be hosted, created, managed, and responsibly taken care of by the organization itself. And hybrid cloud is something which gives you the maximum flexibility because it is a collaboration between a public cloud and a private cloud. Types of cloud services. When we talk about types of cloud services, guys, it is going to be very simple to understand from this chart that you are seeing in front of you. The responsibilities are divided, I would say, precisely as the green responsibilities and the blue responsibilities. Green responsibilities are the ones which are the customer's responsibility, and the blue responsibilities are the ones which are the cloud provider's responsibilities. The on-premise is completely the responsibility of the end customer. That is something which totally the end customer manages. When we talk about infrastructure as a service, it is the compute, network, and storage that the cloud provider will manage. Rest everything will be taken care of by the end customer himself. Platform as a service, which covers additional fundamentals of the cloud or of the IT infrastructure, which will be taken care of by your cloud provider, and you only look into the data access and the applications. And lastly, what you have is software as a service, wherein 99% of the information is taken care of by your cloud provider, and you only look into the data and the access. To give you examples of all of these, on-premise is something which is going to be uh, an example like a hypervisor or a VMware platform. Infrastructure as a service is where you start running virtual machines on the cloud, which are going to be managed by you but hosted in the cloud. Platform as a service. An example for platform as a service is where you actually start using the databases in the cloud, where you start, managing the resources directly in the cloud. And software as a service, your G Suite, your Office 365, the application suite, they are the most versatile examples of software as a service. Infrastructure as a service is basically where you build your pay as you go IT infrastructure by having the servers, the network, the data center, and everything deployed onto the cloud provider's platform. It is something which you can say you are leasing out temporarily from the cloud service provider's platform, and the rest of it is something that you'll manage on your own. Moving to the next, you have your platform as a service. Platform as a service, which would be comprising of all your resources that you would want to deploy apart from infrastructure as a service, because apart from infrastructure, your operating system, your VM compute, and the development tools all will be taken care of by the cloud provider. And then lastly, what you have is software as a service, wherein each and every single aspect of it is going to be something that is going to be managed by a cloud provider. But at the same time, the users will get complete access to their data and the applications in the most seamless possible manner they can. So basically, you have three different models for cloud. That is infrastructure as a service, which is the most flexible cloud service model. You configure and manage your hardware, your applications, everything on your own. The next that you have is platform as a service. A platform as a service is something which is going to focus on the application development only. It is going to be handled completely. The platform will be completely handled by the cloud provider. And lastly, what you have is software as a service, which is a pay as you go model, wherein you only have an access to the application and the data within that particular application. User just pays for the accessibility of those applications and nothing else. Now, before we actually start proceeding to the core services of Azure, let us first start having a look at the Azure environment or how Azure completely looks like. So let me take you to portal.azure.com. This is the management platform for your cloud solution. This is something what your Azure portal would look like, guys, when you log in. Uh, a navigation of all the different types of resources that you can create over here, the most prominent ones. And if not these, then probably you can simply go to create a resource. When you go to create a resource, this is your Azure Marketplace, wherein you can actually explore every single aspect of the service that you would wish to deploy and the types of offering, the types of most versatile offerings that Azure has got to offer you over here. So this basically is going to be your landing page, I can say, wherein you see things like your resources that you can create and the kind of services that you want to deploy, etc. Here are some most prominent Azure services which we can think of using and we can think of deploying. And then you have over here the dashboard, the resources, resource groups, and subscriptions and stuff. Now, when I go to subscriptions, this is the kind of subscription that I'm using. It's a paid subscription wherein I am having a particular subscription ID. When I go to the subscription, when I go to my cost analysis, it's going to give me the details of the expense that I have incurred by hosting some resources in Azure. Yep. Something like this, some kind of statistics of the resources that I have created and the resources that I'm using and stuff like that. Now, basically, how do you land up on this particular Azure page? How do you come here when it comes to uh, doing things on Azure? The first thing that you do is you sign up on the Azure portal. So the very first thing that you do is you sign up on the Azure portal. So when I say sign up on the Azure portal, here I'm talking about portal.azure.com. When you sign up to portal.azure.com, the types of accounts that you can have can be two. Either it can be a personal account or it can be an organization account. While we create this kind of an account, any account when used, it will generate an identity for you in the Azure cloud. And this identity will be something.onmicrosoft.com. So anything which you want to go for a cloud, you go to onmicrosoft.com, that's a Microsoft cloud. So Microsoft Cloud Reserved domain, I can say. Is .onmicrosoft.com. So let's consider an example that I sign up using a personal account. Something like this. It will drop these special characters and the last top level domain name. So therefore, the name would be Ronak MCIDB Hotmail .onmicrosoft.com. This particular thing that is created is my default directory. And this particular default directory will have a unique identification called as the tenant ID. Let's say, for example, I say ronak.shah@loyalbytes.com. Again, it will drop the identities, or it will ask me to generate a new tenant. In case of a corporate account, it will be a little different. So it will just pick up my company name, that is this, not the .com, and it will try to generate a domain name called as loyalbytes.onmicrosoft.com, and the user first created will be ronak.shah@loyalbytes.onmicrosoft.com. This user account is something that I will use to access my resources in Azure. Let's take an example of this. I am logged in with my this ID. So if I now go over here to Azure Active Directory, if I go over here to my company's custom domain name, I see my domain name that is available, and this is the one which is default. The one which says available is the default one. The rest of them are what I have added over here for some or the other X reason. And then I can simply go over here to my properties, and I can change all the information that I wish to change over here. For example, Loyal Bytes Global IT Services, and say save. Test. So that's basically how your identity over the cloud gets generated. And this is the tenant ID that will be assigned to you in order to have a unique identification. So let's say, for example, you procure any third-party application. Let's say you are procuring any third-party antivirus or a third-party security tool. and that tool needs to collaborate with the Microsoft Azure cloud. In that case, this is the tenant ID that needs to be used. This will be the tenant ID that needs to be connected to. This is the tenant ID that needs to be provided. So this is basically how your identity gets generated while you onboard yourself to portal.azure.com. So let me just show you. You go to portal.azure.com and you say create one, which will start creating a new account for you. And you follow the process wherein once done, you will land up at a page over here where it will ask you for some different details with regards to the subscription or the things that you would want to do. Managing Azure is pretty simple, guys. This is the graphical portal from where you can manage it. The other that you can have is the Azure Powershell. So I can simply go to my PowerShell. And over here, inside my PowerShell, I can try to connect to Azure by giving a particular command. So first I need to install the Azure module. Install -module Azure. Azure is the old portal, that is the classic resources. Azure RM are the new resources that we create in Azure portal. So typically anything that you do in the Azure portal is nothing but the Azure Resource Manager. Azure AD for Azure Active Directory, and MS Online for the Microsoft user objects that you would want to manage. And give a command saying -force for the execution of this particular installation to proceed without any interruption. There is no issue with the sound, guys. It is still under process. That is the reason why I had muted myself. And this is something really important and a one-time process which it takes to execute. This is a one-time activity that you need to do so that after this, you can every time seamlessly connect to Azure without running or executing such commands. So this is a one-time lengthy process. Do not worry about it. And I'm here, I'm connected. It's not that you are not hearing. It was just that I was on mute because the finally, I now have the command executed and completed. So now I will have to give the command saying login -Azure RM account, and this should allow me to get to my Azure environment and see what resources are existing over there. It'll ask me for my login ID and password. There I am logged into my environment, and now I can simply give the command saying get -Azure RM resources or something of that sort to see what exactly is there in my Azure subscription. Yeah, there are a couple of resources that are existing by default. I can access all of them as and when required. So this is PowerShell. PowerShell is functional only and only if it is Windows 10 and above. If not PowerShell, then you have another option to launch a shell inside your portal itself, inside your graphical portal itself. So over here, you can simply say, create a particular storage account, and it will help you to access the cloud store. Now, this particular shell that you're seeing, guys, is basically the bash shell, that is the Linux based shell. I can simply go and click over here to PowerShell and switch to the PowerShell. And I can start executing the command same way, get -azure rm resources, and it will give me a list of all the resources that are available in my subscription. So the first you have is the portal. The second you have is the PowerShell. The third you have is the Cloud Shell. And the last that you have is the Azure CLI. Azure CLI is the command line interface for Microsoft Azure, which you can install on your uh, system and access the Azure environment through command line components. Let this be available, and then we'll install the same. That let you run some explicit scripts that you would want to have on your Azure. It gives you a complete summary or list of those commands which can help you to execute certain resources or creation of certain resources using commands which are common, something similar to what you might do on Linux. So basically, Azure CLI and Bash shell that you run the commands on is going to be something pretty much similar. Finally, it is done. Once this is completed, guys, what we now need to do is we can simply go to command line, and in the command line, I can simply give the command saying AZ. When I give the command AZ, I see a lot of Azure based components which can be executed over here. I can now give the command saying AZ login, and I will be allowed to log into the Azure portal. Yup. And you can see I have been logged in over here. And I am logged in, which gives me the home tenant ID. It gives me my subscription ID, whether the subscription is default or not, the name of the subscription, a lot of information. So 4 ways to manage your Azure subscription, 4 ways to manage Azure. One is the portal.azure.com. Another one is the Azure Cloud Shell in the browser itself. You have the PowerShell, Azure Cloud Shell, or the Bash Shell in Azure Portal. You have the PowerShell, and lastly, you have the Azure CLI. These are the components which can be used to manage your Azure Cloud platform, guys. So now that I am over here in Azure, let's start understanding the kind of things that we can make. But prior to that, let us understand a couple of core services that we have on the Azure front. Just a second, guys. Sorry. Yes. So let us start understanding the core services that we have in Azure, and then we'll start creating those resources in Azure in terms of the virtual machine, the network, and the stuff. First of all, understanding the availability of Azure, the geography of Azure that we have. Azure is available across 64 plus regions across the globe, which covers more than 140 countries, making it the largest coverage based cloud provider across the cloud industry. It covers, repeatedly, again, I'm saying it covers up to 64 regions representing 140 countries and has the largest coverage, largest physical availability across the globe when it comes to having the availability or the data residency or availability of the data centers and stuff that you have for Azure. Microsoft has paired the Azure regions. When I say paired the Azure regions, what I mean over here is that with one region, there is another combination of another region that we have in place. And this particular thing has been done in order to make sure that an outage of one particular region uh, can help the services to run from another region, making sure that the customer does not face a downtime. When I talk about these things, you can see a list of regions over here. So it's like North Central US is collaborated with South Central US. You have your East US collaborated with West US, so on and so forth. And that is how basically the regions of Azure are tightly integrated with each other. So one single location that you have is something which is going to have all the resources available and deployed, and the other region might probably act as a backup in case the first region fails. The services will be offered from the next region. Azure Geographies. Azure Geographies are nothing but discrete markets that preserve data residency and compliance boundaries. This is one major reason why in Gulf, Azure is the one which is picking up the fastest, because it's only Microsoft who has got the permissions to have the data of the customer held in that particular region. It allows customers with specific data residency and compliance needs to keep every single aspect of their environment in the closest proximity. Moving on to the next, Azure determines a lot of availability options in order to assure and in order to give the customer the best possible, availability, best possible service level agreement. So when we talk about this particular availability option, we have VM SLAs for a single virtual machine on a premium storage. So there is a standard storage and there is a premium storage. So the one that you have is on a premium storage. So uh, when we say that you have that particular premium storage available for a single virtual machine, the SLA will be 99.9%. If at all I have a collection of virtual machines, then the aspect that I might want to use is going to be availability sets, which assures 99.95% uptime, wherein it is going to be a collection of VMs. We have another option, which is an availability zone, which actually splits the availability of your VMs across multiple data centers within the same region. This assures you a 99.99% uptime SLA. And then lastly, what you have is a multi-region, multi-site consistency disaster recovery solution, which actually uses the paired regions, the ones that we saw uh, a few slides back, as to how the regions are collaborated with each other. What is an availability set? An availability set precisely is going to comprise of two things, guys. One is going to be a fault domain. Another one is going to be an update domain. A fault domain is something which is typically going to be called as you can say your unplanned maintenance component, and an update domain is something which is called as a planned maintenance or a scheduled maintenance component. Every virtual machine that you will create will be assigned with a unique update domain number and a unique fault domain number. When I say it will be assigned with a unique update domain number and a unique fault domain number, what I mean over here is that every virtual machine will be falling under a particular criteria of a you can say a planned maintenance, and at the same time the availability on a particular physical hardware. So availability sets is something that you have to always define when you are creating a clustered environment, when you're creating multiple virtual machines which are going to provide the same service in the network. Availability zones are nothing but physically separated locations within an Azure region. What I mean over here is that your physical region will have multiple data centers across which all your information will be split. It includes more than one data center, which are actually separated with independent power supply, cooling, and networking solutions. And if a particular zone goes down, the other continues to work, making sure that all your resources, all your infrastructure is available with the best possible uptime of the SLA that has been committed to you as an end customer. While we create resources in Azure, we need to understand something called as resource groups. Now, what basically are resource groups? Resource groups are nothing but collection of resources that we can have within a particular Azure environment. This resource group can either be location specific, or the resource group can be resource specific. What I mean over here is I can have multiple resources of the same location, multiple resources of the same location in one resource group, or I can have a similar resource type from different locations, a similar resource type from different locations within the same resource group. So they are nothing but logical containers for multiple resources that will share the same life cycle. So most of the time, you will not split the resources based on their location. You will not split the resources based on how you're going to use them. You will probably split the resources based on when you are going to commission them and when you're going to decommission them. Azure Resource Manager, the component that we are currently working on, everything that we are currently seeing is the Azure Resource Manager itself. So when I say Azure Resource Manager, basically what I mean over here is that all our resources are going to be placed under the latest topology that we have of Azure. At the top level, you will have management groups. Management groups is nothing but a collection of users whom you will create and assign, to have an access to particular resources or to have an access to particular set of subscriptions, etc. Under the management group, you can have one or more subscriptions. When I say one or more subscriptions over here, you are simply talking about one or more billing methods. So I can either have an enterprise subscription, or I can have resources which are, probably going to be deployed for a test purpose or for a development purpose, something like that. Under which I will create resource groups based on the resource life cycles. And then lastly, what I will have is my resources, may that be VMs or networks or database or storage or whatever we call it. Azure has got core services and core components. Core services and core components that we talk about over here is basically going to start off with something called as Azure Computes. For computes, you have multiple options. You can create a single virtual machine that is nothing but an Azure Compute. You can probably create virtual machine scale sets. That's a collection of VMs to form a cluster. You can have functions app. Functions app is where you will not be creating your virtual machines or your resources manually. You will just write a script. You will write a code that will get executed and create the computes or the virtual machines as and when they are required. The next that you can have probably is like your app services and your Kubernetes services. App services and Kubernetes services are going to again typically start having the resources and VMs or the computes spin up in the background on their own as and when required. I need not do that manually. Azure Compute Services, we will precisely be focusing on the virtual machine creation and stuff, which I will be showing you. And apart from that, the other services like the functions app and the VM scale set and stuff is what we can just have a glimpse of while we are working on the portal by seeing some practicals. So now is the time to see how virtual machine creation and stuff takes place. Let us start having a look at the same. Now, what I'm going to do is I'll first of all go to my Azure portal. I'll go to resource groups. I have some good number of resource groups which are already created. I will add another resource group over here, and I'll name this as AZ900 RG01, and I would want to push all my resources in Central US. Simple as that. I gave it a name, I gave it a region, and the resource group is created. Now inside this resource group, I will start creating my very initial resources. So first of all, what I will go and create is going to be a virtual network. I'll create a virtual network which is going to help me create a virtual machine inside it, because every VM will need a network. So I'm naming this as VNet 01 CUS01. Yeah. Next, the IP range that I would want to give depends. It should not conflict with anything that is created in your on-premise. So I'm probably selecting over here 10 10 00/16. I will add a new subnet and name the subnet as production subnet 01 10.10.1.0/24. And say add. Next, I have basic DDoS protection which is there in place, but I'm not enabling this. This is something which we will discuss at a later stage. Firewall disabled, bash and host disabled. These are some advanced options which we are not seeing right now. We are simply just creating a virtual network, review and create. I have my deployment succeeded. My virtual network is created. Now, to this virtual network, I will have to assign a network security group. What basically is a network security group? A network security group is nothing but a collection of rules and regulations, an access control list precisely which you need to create numbers. So I will add a new network security group. NSG01 Central US. I have my network security group created. I'll close this. I'll go to the network security group, and over here to allow, I will just show you how to allow a couple of ports. So I will simply allow a port over here. That is port number 3389. That is going to be for allow RDP. Okay. And at the same time, I'll also allow port number 80. That is for uh, allow web. Once I have these rules created, I can go to the subnet, associate a subnet, and I'll select the subnet that we have created. Click OK. And now any virtual machine that will be added to this particular subnet will have the rules of RDP and web allowed. So you have a network ready, you have the port rules and everything configured. You can now start creating a virtual machine. So I'll go to virtual machines. Add a new virtual machine. In my same resource group, Virtual machine name is going to be maybe VM01 Windows AZ900, something like this. Do I want to have any availability options like an availability zone or an availability set? I'll select availability set. It will ask me to create a new one. I will add it to production high availability set 01. Number of all domains and update domains as per my requirement. Select the operating system that you want to deploy. So I'm selecting Windows Server 2019 Data Center Edition. I'll put it to B2MS size. I don't need more than 8 GB of RAM right now to test the VM. Super admin. Public ports none as of now. Do you have an existing Windows license? Yes. If you have a Windows license, you need to select this option so that your virtual machine will get installed with the trial edition of operating system. Click next. So this being a single virtual machine, if I put it on a premium SSD, I do have an SLA. Putting it on standard does not entitle me to any kind of an SLA. So I'll put it on premium SSD. I can say create and attach a new data disk. I can attach a new data disk for 256 giga. Say, okay. It's a premium SSD that I'm attaching. Okay. Next, it will select the network that you have created. It will create a new public IP for you. Network security group advanced and select the one that you had created, NSG01. Do you want to put it behind a load balancer? No. Accelerated networking is not supported. Management of the virtual machine. OS diagnostics needs to be enabled. I will name this as CUS01DIAG store 01. So that's basically my central US diagnostics storage account. Right. And an automatic shutdown policy to shut down the virtual machine at 7 o'clock. Notify before shutdown to this particular email address. If I wish to enable a backup for this virtual machine, I can do that. I can create a new vault saying backup vault 01 CUS. It'll create a new policy. Name this as AZ900 custom policy. Daily backup at 7 a.m. Retain weekly backups for 12 weeks and retain yearly backups for 10 years. Maybe I can take it up altogether up to 99 years. 999 years? No, only 99 years. So I'll put it to 10 years. Backup resource group is optional. So I'm naming this as AZ900 backup RG01 test. Okay. OS orchestrated patching, you don't need to do anything specifically. If you wish to put it manually, you can put it manually just in case you have your own SCCM environment or something of that sort. Any specific extensions or something that you need to install? No. Next. Review. Have a look at the resources that are being spinned up. And click create. I have my virtual machine finally created. I can go to the resource and I can see that an extensive dashboard kind of stuff is in front of me, which gives me the details of the size of the VM, the disk that I have created, the type number of data disks that are associated, the availability and scaling and stuff, whether uh, things are readily placed correctly on or not. I can go to boot diagnostics to evaluate whether my virtual machine has been booted up correctly or not. You can see that it's correctly available. I can simply go to the virtual machine out here and click on connect, RDP, the public IP address, and connect to that virtual machine. Now, I just have a little bit of the configuration that I've done on this VM. I will now simply go to this virtual machine, try to identify the public IP, copy, and see what happens. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the refresher session for Azure 900. Good luck. So that's how basically you host a virtual machine. You host your services in Azure. You have the virtual machine created with all the specific security rules and everything in place. And lastly, I can simply scroll down over here to this particular virtual machine. I can go to backup and check that backup and everything is configured, but the initial backup is still pending. So I can simply say backup now, and the backup of the virtual machine will be triggered. Guys, take a break for 10 minutes. I'll broadcast a message out here. 10 minutes of a break. And then we continue, guys, again. 10 minutes from now. Okay. So I have the virtual machine backup that was triggered once we went on the break. Let me now head back to the VM, go to the backups, and check the status. You can see that the last backup says success. So that's basically how simple it is to manage your virtual machines. Now, as I say that things in Azure are highly scalable and easily manageable, currently the virtual machine size that I'm using is a 2-core GB RAM. I probably might want to reduce it to a 2-core 4 GB RAM. I select, I resize, and I'm good to go. So basically, now I will be bearing the cost of a B2 size of a virtual machine rather than the B2MS because I have moved from an 8 giga RAM to a 4 giga RAM. This is how you can create, manage virtual machines in Azure. You alternatively have additional components called as container services or Azure Kubernetes services. These Azure container services or Kubernetes services are nothing but PaaS offerings that allow you to upload your containers, which will then run services for you in the cloud. A Kubernetes container is an orchestrator service for managing a large number of containers. So you host multiple containers, and those containers are nothing but deploying your container services. Let's see how that works. I go back to my portal. My virtual machine size should have been changed by now. Yes, no, it's not. Oh, resize is already in process. Maybe refresh. Yep, it is changed to a 4 GB of RAM. I will now go to container services. I have over here where I can deploy my Azure container instances. I can create a new container instance. Inside my AZ900RG group. Container name is going to be Z900 test container. It's going to be an Azure container registry. If so, I have to select if I have any existing resource available. I'll say no, use a quick start image, which is going to be a Microsoft Windows based image with a 2 vCPU and 2.5 GB of RAM, no GPUs required. Select the networking type, public or private, wherever you want to place it. So it says that private currently is grayed out because it is not available for Windows containers. So I will probably put a public endpoint and name this as AZ900 test container. Next, restart policy on failure. It should automatically restart the container services. Now, this is already running. I can go to containers and it says that I already have one AZ9 test container, 900 test container that is available over here, which is running. I can go to properties. It will show me the container public IP address, right? And the port number for the same. So if I copy this IP and try to access this, what is it going to show me? It says that IIS as a service is running. Why? Because the port number 80 and I selected IIS on a Windows Nano server. Now, I can have automation tasks that can activate or run on this particular container. I can export the template of whatever has been configured, or I can simply go over here to Kubernetes and I can add a Kubernetes cluster. And this Kubernetes cluster will then manage all my container services. Here, yep, I'll select my AZ900 Kubernetes cluster name AZ900 test AKS cluster. Scroll down. Next, node and pools, whether you want a specific node or a specific pool, depending upon how you want to have the Kubernetes service run in place. I said virtual nodes are enabled. Yes, this is going to be the primary agent pool that we are creating. As of now, it does not support Windows. It supports only Linux. So click next. The authentication type and the components that I need to enable over here, right? And if at all I want the cluster to be managed by my Azure Active Directory, and a lot more, of course, over here. You can select your existing production subnet and stuff. You can add another subnet for an AKS. Okay, I have a subnet that is created. I'll select the subnet, the new one. The service address range is what I can, select over here. So it's going to be like 10.10.10./24. Kubernetes DNS server IP range 10.10.10.10. Docker bridge address. This is the address at which the interface will be connected to all my containers. The DNS prefix is picking up automatically. Private cluster enabled. Yes. Say next. It will ask you to have any specific kind of an integration and stuff done. I will just enable it on the default settings as of now and say create. All right, guys. So we have the deployment for the Kubernetes cluster completed, and that's where now I will be able to manage my container resources I want to deploy or add them over there. Here are the workloads and stuff. Since it's a Windows-based Kubernetes, Linux-based Kubernetes cluster that we have just created, some of the features are in a preview version, but I can definitely go to the node pools, add additional nodes that I want. I can change the configuration of those nodes, scale up, scale down. Everything that is customizable is available over here. So that's basically how your container services work. We already saw creation of virtual networks. Apart from that, you have additional services called as the Azure Load Balancer. You have the VPN Gateway. You have application gateway, and you have content delivery networks that we can have deployed in our Azure environment. Now, basically, what are my Azure load balancers? They are as good as your firewall based, or F5 based load balancers, or some front ending FortiGate load balancers. Depending upon how your hardware load balancer would function, exactly the same way you have your Azure load balancer functioning. You have VPN gateways. VPN gateways are nothing but your router based devices, soft devices that you would configure, soft devices which are going to help you establish connectivity between the Azure environment and the on-premise. And using both of them, you can have the deployment managed in a way wherein your hybrid cloud would function in the most smoothest possible manner. Apart from that, additional components that we have are Azure Application Gateway, which is going to act as my web application firewall, or a kind of a proxy wherein I'm protecting the applications in Azure from being directly exposed to the public network. And then you can have something called as content delivery networks. Uh, Content delivery networks, guys, for your understanding, I would say that Microsoft again is the largest cloud provider to have the maximum number of endpoints across the globe, for obvious reasons, because they also have the maximum number of data center availability physically. What basically are content delivery networks? They are endpoints that are used to stream services, stream media services for platforms like Netflix and YouTube and stuff, wherein the content of a particular region is cached on these endpoints to be accessed in another region. 90% of your Netflix based or YouTube based or streaming media based services are the ones which run on these kind of content delivery network endpoints. We already created a virtual network. You have three different types of data management. There are three different types of data components that we can implement. One is a structured data. Another one is a semi-structured data. Another one is an unstructured data. Structured data is something which will be stored in a proper tabular format, which can be defined as per a particular database. And unstructured data is something which is going to be simple blob, or some kind of a storage component that we need to implement in place. And it is nothing but randomly picking up files and storing them onto your Azure based storage that you create. And then what you have is a semi-structured data, which actually is probably going to be an ad hoc schema with less organized fields. Means it's partially an organized structured data, partially an unstructured data. And it is going to be most of the time non-relational and not database level data, which is going to be stored probably in the tabular format or in the rows and the columns format, depending upon how you want to place them. So Azure storage services are offered at two different levels. One is infrastructure as a service, another one is a platform as a service. Infrastructure as a service will help you to store disks, to store files, folders, etc. Your platform as a service gives you containers, tables, queues. Containers, the ones that we created right now. tables and queues format as well. And this particular storage capability of IaaS and PaaS both are built on a unified distribution storage system, which means that any kind of restrictions, any kind of security, any kind of accessibility limit or protocol based implementation that you would want to do can be done on infrastructure as a service and even on platform as a service. We will have a walkthrough of creating the storage at a later stage. Additionally, another core component that comes into picture from Azure front is the Azure Database Services. When we talk about Azure Database Services over here, I'm talking about the different options that we have. The first one is the Azure Cosmos DB. It's a globally distributed database service and one of the finest type of database services that are currently available. Like there are many customers who are evaluating and moving to a Cosmos DB based environment from a SQL environment, if at all it's a small setup, or if at all it's a setup which can be easily transitioned or moved. You have Azure Sql Databases that helps you to deploy those traditional SQL databases into the cloud and have the management done. So we will also see how to create these SQL databases. And lastly, what you have is Azure Database Migration Services, which can help you to pick up the database and the component services from your on-premise and push them directly to the cloud. I already gave you a summary of what Azure Marketplace looks like. So we are now on 2 lab hands-on to be done. One is for the blob storage and one is for the SQL database. Identifying the Azure solutions. Apart from the core components that we have in Azure, we also have something called as an Azure IoT Central. We have Azure IoT Hub. IoT Central is something wherein you will have all your Internet of Things and Internet of Things component deployed over there. And IoT Hub is something which is going to be just a typical type of a test environment that you would want to deploy, a kind of a simulator that you would want to deploy. So before proceeding with this, let us first start creating the blob storage. Let's have an access to the storage and see how it looks. I'll again go to my create a resource, or rather, let me just look up over here for a storage account. I'll create a new storage account over here. Inside AZ900RG01. Name of the storage account would be AZ900 test RG or test blob 01. A standard account, not a premium one, to save on cost. Definitely for data and stuff, you will always keep it as standard. LRS, I am keeping it as a locally redundant storage that is going to be available from a single data center. Blob access tiers. There can be 3 type of access tiers, guys. One is a hot tier, another one is a cool tier, another one is an archive tier. Over here at the time of creating, you will either set it to be a cool tier or a hot tier. Cool tier is that data which is accessed once in 30 days, and hot tier is that type of data which is going to be the most frequently accessed data. So I'll keep it to be hot tier. Next, not restricting it to any kind of a network. If I want, I can typically restrict it to a particular network only. I'm keeping it publicly available. Next, turn on soft delete for blobs. Yes. So if I delete a blob, it should be maintained for like 365 days. It cannot be more than 365. Turn on soft delete for file shares. Yes. Even if I delete files and folders, retain them for 365 days. Versioning to be enabled. Yes. Turn on blob change feed to keep a track on what has changed and what is not. Click next. Secure data transfer is enabled. Allow blob public access is also enabled. That is over the internet. TLS version minimum 1.2 for the secure access. Large files are enabled, right? And click next review and let the storage account get created. Once I have the deployment for the storage account completed, I now need to try and access this particular storage account. There are multiple ways to do it, guys. I can either click here. I can probably go to the blob containers over here, and inside the blob containers, I can, try to create a new container and do things. This is something through the browser which I don't like much. I have another option which is called as the Azure Storage Explorer. So you need to go over here and say download Azure Storage Explorer. You get this particular Azure Storage Explorer downloaded, which I have already downloaded and installed on my device. So I'll go over here to my Storage Explorer. So it asks me to add an Azure account. I said yes, I would want to add an Azure account, or I can even directly add just the storage account if I want to. I said no, I want to add the complete Azure account. I will say apply. I purposely waited because it takes some time to pull out all the information from the backend. Yeah. And I can now see my blob storage over here. I can now inside my blob storage go to containers. Inside the containers, I can go to this and right click, create a blob container and name this as test container. Sorry, test container 01. And here, pretty decent. Now I can simply click on upload files. Select a file that I wish to upload. Let me select a file which is a decently large file. Okay. Not all of them. Rather, let me just select just one of them. Okay. And this is going to be a hot tier default directory and say upload. And have a look. The blob was created and the upload has started. Transfer has started at a particular speed over here. File is uploaded. I can now simply go back to my browser out here. I can refresh to see the container that I created and inside the container, the file that I created, right? So that's how basically you work with the blob storages, and these blob storages can be accessed. So here I have added a complete account. So if I want, I can simply select this particular account out here and I can probably go to settings and do every single thing that I want to do with this particular application. And I can, rather than adding an account, I can directly even add a storage. So how do I do that? I'll go to the storage blob. I will go to the storage account shared access signature. Shared access signature is something that I use to access this particular storage. So containers, objects, services, and say generate the SaaS. This is the connection string out here that I have. So blob service SaaS URL. If I copy this, if I say I want to connect, add a shared access signature URI. Next URI is this. You can see that it auto determined everything with my display name. Next, connect. That's it. I have a dedicated storage account as well connected over here, wherein I can play around with the containers that I created. So that's how easy it is to work with the storage on cloud as well, guys. You can have all your information and everything available over there. Now, once this particular storage is created, let's have a look at creation of SQL databases. It's again pretty simple. I can simply look up for SQL. Create a SQL database. Select the database over here, test AZ900 DB01, create a new. Server name test AZ900 VM01. Super admin for my SQL login. Location will be Central US. Okay. Next, public endpoint. Allow Azure services, yes. Allow add current client IP address, yes. Any additional settings that you would want to make? I said no. Next again, review. You can see the estimated pricing. This is because I have selected the generation with the licensing. So I can probably just cut this down, saying I have the licenses available in place with me. So change the configuration, this one, and at the same time, let me select a basic one and say apply. Yeah, next. So we have now got our SQL database created, and I can now go to this particular database. I can have the connection strings and stuff available to attach it to any of the application or service that I want, the way we attach any other SQL database. It's that simple. So that was about understanding the SQL databases and the storage. Coming to the IoT component, first let us understand what IoT is, and then we can just create an IoT hub and add a device to it. IoT components are something which you can deploy for IoT devices. So IoT hub, if I go over here to my Azure portal, I can go to IoT hub, create an IoT hub, Central US, public endpoints accessible by all, standard tier, devices to cloud partition, like total number of devices that you would want to categorize the connections into. So as of now, I'm kind of categorizing it only to the four different types. Next, and then I can, and here, once the IoT platform is ready, you can start going to IoT devices and connecting whatever type of devices you want to attach over here. So it depends what type of device you want to create, what type of device you want to add. So if I say new device ID, connect this device to an IoT hub. Yes, set a parent device. Now over here, it will ask you to set the number of devices or the configurations that you want to do. And the devices which you set over here as parent will be the ones which will be used to connect to all the additional child devices within your environment. So basically speaking, connect this device to an IoT hub. If you disable this, you probably can select no parent device and proceed. And if not, if yes, then you have to add the list of parent devices that you want to configure or connect with this particular component. So you have this particular device that is created, the status says disabled because it's just a dummy device that I have set. You can probably add additional devices based on the requirement, and IoT hub will then start processing the same. Azure also has the functionality to manage data in terms of data mining, in terms of handling the data implementation that you do over there. So you have Azure SQL Databases, Azure SQL Database Warehouse Services, you have Hadoop, and you have Azure Data Lake Analytics, which will be used as a dumpster for dumping all the major chunk of data that you might have in your organization. Azure is extremely powerful in terms of AI and machine learning. It gives ample of options with regards to Azure cognitive services and additional AI-based components that can be deployed in order to have your complete environment automated. It offers you serverless computing. As I said, functions, apps, and stuff are the things which you can just define and leave it. They will spin up the compute in the backend as and when required. So Azure functions, logic apps, and event grids are the components which can be used for serverless computing while working on platform as a service. Implementing Azure functions, we will see this at a little later stage post completion of this. Azure gives you two major options for DevOps. One is DevOps Services and another one is DevOps Test Labs. DevOps Services is something for development and collaboration of tools, including pipelines which will be used to execute codes from Visual Studio. So from Visual Studio, you can have your codes directly get executed in the DevOps services. And if not that, then you have Azure Dev Test Labs, which are going to be used for performing tests of your labs, performing development test labs in Azure itself to identify whether the code that you're trying to execute is working successfully or not. You have Azure App Services. App services are the ones which will be used to quickly and easily build web and mobile applications for any platform or device. And these application services enable you to build and host web applications, mobile backends, and a lot of APIs, which can be multilingual. They can also be global. They can be deployed in different data centers of Azure. Security and compliance capable, security and compliance enabled, and lastly, integration with Visual Studio. So you execute a code in Visual Studio, and that can directly be implemented. That can directly be materialized in your Azure App Services to have the application available over there. We will create a web app as well. So this brings us to an end of another module with Azure, that is the second module, we already saw the different management tools, that is the portal, PowerShell, Cloud Shell. You also have an Azure mobile app, but it's a pretty basic app just to view and manage your resources there. Apart from that, nothing specific that you can do from the portal. And then Azure REST APIs are nothing but the code executions that can take place from different third-party platforms like Git Hub and stuff. We will see the Azure Advisor as well now, but after a little while. And then we'll be moving to the next component, that is the understanding of Microsoft security, privacy, compliance, and trust components. So before we proceed with these guys, again, this is an additional critical module that we would be looking into. So I again give you another 15 minutes of a break time, wherein you can just get a refresher done and come back. What is the point of IoT? Can you please elaborate this question a little bit more, Nada Hamdi? Can you please elaborate your question a little bit more? Right, guys. I think there are no further questions from anyone. Let us proceed. So the next is understanding the security and the privacy compliance components that we have for Azure. A couple of things. The first one is the security that you have from the network connectivity perspective. The very first feature that you have from Azure is the Azure Firewall, which is a complete firewall as a service that is, equivalent to what you might do on a FortiGate or on a Sonic Wall or on any other such hardware firewall device. Uh, you also have Azure Application Gateway providing you a web application firewall service, but that is pretty smaller as a variant as compared to the Azure firewall services that we have. You have Azure DDoS protection service. If you remember, at the time of creating the VM, it gave me an option to enable it. What exactly does DDoS protection do? It sanitizes unwanted network traffic and just makes the legitimate traffic reach the virtual machine. Uh, it makes sure that no service availability is impacted, making sure that the user's service uptime is assured and running. Basic service tier is automatically enabled in Azure, so you don't have to do anything manually. If you want to go for a premium one, then you have to select the premium one and enable it manually. Standard service tier adds mitigation capabilities tuned to protect Azure virtual network resources. So basic is enabled by default. When you enable standard, it enhances the type of mitigation capabilities that DDoS protection would have to protect your network. You have network security groups, which we already created. We saw how network security groups work. They are used to set inbound and outbound firewall rules to filter by source destination, IP addresses, and ports and protocols. This overrides the default rules that are available. Default rules are as it is of practically no use because they restrict every single thing and you are not allowed to do anything as such. You have Azure Application Gateways. Application gateways provide grouping of servers wherein, I'm so sorry, not application gateways, they're application security groups. Application security groups will be used to club multiple servers or web servers together and define a set of security rules for those particular virtual machines to make sure that all have the identical port filtering or all have the identical rules in place. You have a variety of Azure networking solutions that you can select. NSG is something which you will have by default. Web application firewall depends whether you want to go for web application firewall or you want to go for an Azure firewall. You have perimeter layers with services like DDoS protection. So DDoS protection is again something which depends whether you want to implement or not. And then at the networking layer, as I said, NSG is something which is going to be there by default to permit inbound and outbound traffic. Apart from networking, storage, database, IoT, app services, virtual machines, Azure also gives you a very, very extensive platform of managing identities. Identity management comprises of three different fundamentals. One is authentication, another one is authorization, and third one is accounting. So authentication is where you enter your credentials, you use your smart card to get authenticated on some particular service and you get an access to the same. And authorization is where you are authenticated, but you still do not have an access to a particular resource. So authentication is nothing but the identity verification, and authorization is nothing but the permissions that you can have on some particular resource. You have Azure Active Directory as a component. You have Azure Active Directory as a component, which offers you the most versatile methods of authentication that you can implement. So you can authenticate using your smart cards or some biometrics. You have single sign-on services that can be used. You have application management. B2B, most of the components that we would be using are B2B, just in case you are providing any application level of services to the end customers, then it's supposed to be B2C. And then you also have device management, that is endpoint protection and endpoint management, that is a part of the Azure Active Directory, which is another powerful suite to protect all your users and remote devices wherever they are being accessed from. You have Azure multi-factor authentication as a service, which comes even as a part of the free Azure Active Directory. This multi-factor authentication is always going to be required each time you try to authenticate on some unknown device, unfamiliar device, unfamiliar location, depending upon the conditions that you set, of course. So it's nothing but a two-factor authentication service that is being provided over here more aggressively than any other cloud solution identity provider. You have Azure Security Center. It was earlier claimed that Microsoft might land up retiring the Azure Security Center. But over a period of time, Microsoft has just hardened the way Security Center functions, because it gives you security recommendations. It gives you security alerts. It also gives you options to set up security policies in order to make sure that you're auto remediating the issues that come up in your environment. You have Azure Key Vaults, which are going to be used as the hardware security modules, to store all the encryption keys that you create in Azure, and based on those encryption keys, then your storage or your data will be accessed. So Azure Key Vaults also play a very important role as a resource in your cloud environment. You have Azure Information Protection. Azure Information Protection is something where you implement information rights management, and you try to, automatically apply some specific rules or manually try to encrypt particular document from being accessed. So let me show you. For example, I have over here have a student material which I have encrypted over here. So when I double click this particular file, it's not going to open. So will not save changes, and when you try, it says it's encrypted. So this is a file which I have encrypted using Azure Information Protection. So to access this, I have to open with an Azure Information Protection viewer. When I try to access it using the Azure Information Protection viewer, it says that it's restricted by a particular user, and I need to have those permissions to be available in place. And unless and until I don't have those permissions, I won't be able to access that particular document. That's how basically it works, right? When I click on open, it allows me to open that particular file, but it requires a particular credential without which the file will not be accessed. So Azure information protection is going to be another important aspect that you would want to implement to protect your end users data. You have Azure Advanced Threat Protection Services. Azure Advanced Threat Protection Services are nothing but dedicated platform for monitoring and responding to suspicious activities within your environment. This is completely going to be sensor based, so it does not require you to install anything specific onto your servers, because this will be connected directly to the domain controller. And the cloud service component is going to run on the Azure infrastructure. So typically speaking, Azure will do everything, and you need not have anything specific implemented on your servers to have this in place. You have Azure Policies. Azure gives you this particular option of Azure Policies. These policies are nothing but a service to create and assign some specific types of rules and regulations. These policies enforce different rules and effects with the resources that are created in the portal. So so that the SLA is met, the resources remain compliant, nobody gets an unauthorized access, and a lot more. So how basically do these policies work? You create a policy definition, you assign it to the resources, and then review the rules for that particular policy. So if I go here and I do my this thing and say policy, right? So this is the option that you have to set up, Azure policies, right? You can define over here the types of assignments that you want, and you can see over here the kind of information that it shows, saying that the subscription is not compliant, and there are so many resources that are resources which are accessed without any specific compliance in place. You go to getting started, start the policies, go to the compliance, assign them, and you should be good to go. So it's a pretty aggressive component that you need to set up, and pretty lengthy, which can be configured to control your environment thoroughly. Policy initiatives are nothing but policy templates which will be in place by default, and you can use those policy templates to process your data or process your information further. Just 1 minute, guys. I'm back. Yes. So let us proceed where we were. So creating Azure policies is a pretty simple process. As I said, you can either derive it out of a particular template, or you can simply have the Azure policy in place, which makes sure that all your custom settings and everything are controlled. So you can create a policy assignment. Again, that's all that happens from here itself. You can go over here to policy. Inside policies, you can go and create a policy assignment. See, you can assign either an initiative, which is a policy initiative, or assign a policy. So I'll say assign a policy to a particular subscription. Policy definition, by default over here, it will show you whatever policy definitions are available. Say Azure backup should be enabled for virtual machines. Select, and policy enforcement enabled, assigned by Ronak. Next. Effect, audit if does not exist. So if the policy does not exist, it will audit it. And for this particular thing, if I want to create a managed identity, I can create it. The policy does not contain any role definitions. So I am creating a vanilla policy, hence it does not have any specific user rights and permissions. Click next and say create. I created an Azure assign policy component over here. I can simply go to the assignments and then I can define as to which user or which component should have these policies in place. Parameters need to be configured, needs to be set up. So policy definitions are things that can work based on what you wish. Your policies, you also have something called as an excellent RBAC component. RBAC can be assigned at every resource level, guys. So let's say, for example, I have created all these resources. So either I can go to the complete resource group and go to access control. This is nothing but the RBAC. I can assign roles. I can do anything and everything that I want to over here. Or I can simply go to that specific database level. Again, go to activity logs and assign specific user components over here, not from the activity logs, but from auditing and identities management over here. If not that, I can go to the storage account. I can have access control over here to the storage account. I can have access control to the Kubernetes cluster. So role-based access control are fine-grained policies which can be assigned at every specific resource level. They need not be restricted to some specific component. You can define resource locks. Very simple component over here. I can simply go to this particular Kubernetes cluster that I have created. If I want, I can define locks over here. When I say lock, I can say type of lock is read only, so cannot be changed, and say, okay, that's it. My resource is locked. Nobody will be able to change or modify this particular Kubernetes cluster environment or do anything with this particular Kubernetes cluster because it is going to be completely locked. This lock can be assigned by the administrators and removed also by the administrators only. So you can simply delete the lock if you want to modify that particular resource and then lock it again. So cannot delete and read only are the types of locks that you can assign. You have Azure Blueprints. Azure Blueprints are some specific types of components which you can create and maintain in your Azure environment as a template, you know. And this particular template is something that can be used to spin up virtual machines or repeatedly keep on deploying resources in your network. You can do resource tagging. Let me show you a very aggressive tagging that I have for one of the environments. So tagging is something which we can see over here. Like if I go to all resources, these are the kind of tags that we assign. Tagging is going to simplify how your resources are created, how what that resource typically belongs to, and what is the reason for creating that resource. So let's say, for example, over here in my resource group over here, if I go to tags, I can assign tags over here to this particular resource group, and then I will say application owner, Ronak Shah, environment, staging, and say save. So this is the kind of resource tags that I have added. Now, if I go to overview and I go to all my resources over here, these are the resources that will be tagged as application owner so and so, environment, staging. If I now go to all resources, and if I select any resource that I have created, maybe my IoT, this component, I should be able to see my tags. Okay, it'll still take some time to reflect. I will be able to see the tagging available over here. So tagging is nothing but the typical kind of a color coding thing that you do, you know, in order to help your environment get identified easily. You have Azure Monitor. Azure Monitor is something which helps you to collect the information and evaluate everything within your environment. Again, right? So this is your Azure Monitor. You can connect virtual machines to this particular monitor to see the insights of the same. Yeah. You can connect your storage accounts, you can connect containers, every single aspect of your network, every single aspect of your environment, which you can just evaluate and monitor from your Azure Monitor component. Similarly, you have Azure Service Health that gives you an insight of how the services or how the components in Azure are running and whether they are healthy or whether they are overutilizing the cost or whether they are underperforming or whatever it is. Microsoft Azure exclusively provides government services, which is for US federal agencies and typically isolated for the government. Azure Government is something which is an isolated, specifically separated data center. This is from the non isolated from the non US government deployments. It is accessible to authorized personnel. It is only available for specific users. Not all can access it, and it meets the high end compliance standards which are to be taken care of when it comes to the security of a particular nation. There is another region for Azure which is called as China 21 ViaNet. This particular Azure China 21 ViaNet is a physically separated instance of Microsoft Azure Cloud located only within China, and this is for the Chinese customers only and not for any other regions. So if you probably wish to deploy your resources in China, you cannot because it is China's first foreign public cloud service provider in compliance with government regulations. Lastly, moving on to the module wherein we talk about Azure support and Azure services. Azure subscriptions, as I told you, you can have multiple subscriptions under one single Azure account. So every single subscription can have a different method of billing. What are the types of Azure subscriptions that you can? Uh, I'll just mention it out here. The first one would be a free trial, the one that you use for testing and evaluating. Second one would be a pay as you go, that is over the internet. That is add a credit card information and simply just, the way you start using the services, the same way the way you use your services, you pay for it. You have an enterprise agreement with Microsoft. And lastly, you can have a cloud solutions provider based subscription. So these are the types of subscriptions that you can have. And lastly, what you can have is Azure and Open. This is where you use credits to have your Azure subscription run, and this is also something which is going to be, similar to your enterprise agreement as well. Azure subscription offerings, as I told you, there are 3 of them. So free, pay as you go, enterprise agreement. Student is something which Microsoft gives for evaluating Azure for college students and stuff, but that is something which requires an education account, and an account can have multiple subscriptions or even a single subscription. Azure free accounts, as I told you, there is a free trial account wherein you have 12 months of free services in Azure that can be utilized, but the credits will be only 200, which will expire in 30 days. And the rest of the services, which are always free of cost, 25 plus services, is what you can keep on evaluating as and when required. So these, at the end of the trial, if you wish to continue more than $200 or more than 30 days, then you need to upgrade to pay as you go. Planning and managing the cost in Azure, it becomes extremely important for you to convince the customer as to uh, how cloud is more beneficial than the on-premise solution that they are using. In that case, Microsoft offers you multiple solutions to have the calculations done in the most optimized way, so that you can have the best possible result for the end customer. The first component that you would want to look into is purchasing the Azure products and services. As I said, you have multiple options, and the three main customer types would be enterprise, pay as you go, that is web direct, or cloud solutions provider. Personal accounts can purchase the services, but they are extremely expensive. It is the enterprise, the web direct, and the cloud solutions provider who get the maximum possible discount in terms of the pricing of the services. Factors that would affect the cost, like while you start your services deployment in Azure, it will be important to evaluate and identify which are the resources or what would be the reason that I would be charged for a specific component in Azure. So that is where you consider three factors: the type of the resource, what are you trying to create, where are you trying to create, and what exactly is the service. So these are the three things on which Azure is going to charge you: the resource type, what exactly are you making, the service, which Azure service are you trying to use, and the location. Depending upon the data center that you select to place your services, your pricing is going to vary, your pricing is going to increase or decrease. Identify zones for billing purpose. Depending upon where you are again placing your resources, your your resources will be charged accordingly, as I said. So data moving in and out of Azure data centers, some inbound data transfers are going to be free, like within the zone itself it's going to be free. Whereas if it is going out of the zone, so from zone 1 to zone 3 or zone 2 to DE zone 1 or however it is, in that case your data transfer is also going to be charged to a certain extent. Pricing will be based depending upon what exactly the customer is transferring and what is the size of the data. You have Azure pricing calculator, guys. Azure pricing calculator, which is going to let you evaluate the cost of the resources for that particular customer in a very optimistic way, right? So you can go to pricing calculator. This particular pricing calculator, guys, is going to let you prepare a complete bill of quantity for a particular customer who is looking to host a particular service in Azure. So let's say, for example, I want to create a bill of quantity for a customer who is looking for virtual machines in Azure. So I will simply add virtual machines. I'll add storage accounts, cost and billing management, IP addresses, virtual networks, network watcher, Bashan. Of course, I would want to add backup as well for the VM. So I have added a decent number of resources over here. I will name this as my application server. I will name this as AZ900 sample BOQ. Select the zone, select the region, number of virtual machines, I said 3. With a decent size of D8S. Okay. You have an option over here to either have a monthly payment or a 1 year reserved upfront cost or a 3-year reserved upfront cost. There will be a huge difference in this. You can check the pricing. So if I say I have Azure hybrid benefit and I'm going for a 3 years reserved instance, you can see the costing that has come down from per month 1000 to per month 400, right? So this is something which is pretty exciting for every customer. Reserved instance. I'll put it on the premium SSD. Number of disks 1, 256 giga, or maybe I can put it 2. Yeah. Bandwidth, I don't need to mention anything specific as such. As I told you, that first 5 GB per month of data transfer is free in every zone. So I can probably make it as 15 GB. Still, I'm not going to be charged anything great. 150 GB, nothing much. Storage account, this is going to be my log storage. So again, I'll select the region to be West US, right? 1000 GB. This you cannot go for a reserved storage, because this costing increases rather than decreasing, right? Because you would be actually reserving that particular storage for the customer. So not required. You have to put it on pay as you go. You then go for cost and billing management. Amount is monthly $10,000, whatever it is. It's not going to charge you anything. If you wish to actually calculate your AWS spending as well, it's going to cost you like $100 per month for an amount of $10,000 that you spent on AWS. IP addresses, I'm naming this as public IP addresses. West US, again, standard ARM. Number of IP addresses 5, or maybe I'm putting it to 2. 3 VMs I have, so maybe 3. I'm going to name this as my West US VNet. Network watcher. Network. Region, I'm going to put it as West US again. West US again for Azure Bastion, 5 GB. Azure backup, so VM backup. This also I will put it in West US. Azure virtual machines for 1 VM, now 3 VMs. 3 VMs, the ones that I'm creating. Yes, somebody unmuted. Do you have a question, guys? Yeah, I'm just populating the data over here, and then I can simply export, and I have an estimate that is exported. When I open the Excel sheet, it will give me the complete result of whatever I had selected, whatever I mentioned. That's my BOQ title, the custom name, and the monthly cost, estimated upfront cost, etc., etc. All my resources have been clearly mentioned and available over here. So that is basically how you play around with the Azure pricing calculator. You have another tool called as the total cost of ownership calculator. So you can simply go to this and look up for Azure Tco Calculator. So this particular Azure Tco Calculator is going to ask you for the details. Workload number 1, Windows and Linux physical servers. Number of servers, let's say I am counting as 3. Processors per server are 4. Cores per server are 8. Per server memory is maybe 64 giga, right? And so this is the total number of servers and stuff that I have defined. Then I can define my databases over here, right? So processors per database 2, 4, 32 or 64. Yep, number of servers 3. SQL maximum database size is going to be 30 GB. Concurrent logins more than 350. That is the total number of users maybe in my organization. I can add storage, local SAN SSD based storage 1 TB, and IOPS are maybe 35,000. Outbound network bandwidth capacity 1 GB. That's decent. Click next. Currency in dollars. Windows Server Software Assurance coverage, yes. SQL Software Assurance, yes. Right. Geo redundant storage, do you have it or do you look for it? I said no. Virtual machine costs, yes. Electricity cost and stuff is something which is a random estimation that it gives you over here, an IT labor cost and hardware cost, etc., etc. Click next. And over 5 years with Azure, your estimated cost saving could be as much as USD so and so. Now, this is something which completely it has estimated based on the information that I provided over here. You can see the complete report. How much am I spending? What is the compute cost over here? Yeah, right. So it's going to be a complete report. Storage cost, networking cost, data center cost, an extensive storage. I mean your total cost of ownership calculator. So once you say download, this is going to generate a complete report and save it for you based on whatever we have just seen, right? So if I say save it to my desktop, right? So that's how basically you use your total cost of ownership calculator. Cost minimization can be done if at all I am using the Azure pricing calculator and my TCO calculators correctly. I need to monitor the usage with Azure Advisor. So if I take you now to my portal and if I take you to Advisor, my Azure Advisor is going to show me the current report of how my environment is running. You are following all of the cost recommendations, which is excellent. Reliability is good. Security, there are 15 recommendations, 3 impacted resources. This is something which I need to follow. So if I click on security, it's going to take me to a couple of things like MFA should be enabled and service principles should be created correctly and stuff like that, blah, blah. So here I should be following the advisor. I should be defining spending limits on the subscriptions, right? Azure reservations, as I told you, 1 year or 3 year RI and Azure hybrid benefits are going to help you to save a lot of cost. Choose low cost locations and regions as and when possible. As I said, based on the region that you select, your charges will be incurred. Keep up to date with the latest subscriptions and offers in order to make sure that you are benefiting the most out of it, and apply tags to identify the cost owners. And this tagging will help you to reduce the cost. Azure cost management, I already showed this to you, but let's take a walkthrough once again. Subscription. This is the subscription. We have cost evaluation over here. This is being done, or you can simply look up for cost management and billing. This is going to give you the complete insights of the cost analysis in your environment. Resource wise costing will take some time. Something went wrong. Yeah, so this is the cost analysis, which is going to show me the service name, storage, SQL database, IoT Hub, container, etc. Locations in central in US East, US Central, whatever locations are being used, and the resource group name where my costing is being incurred. So cost and billing management is also going to help me to evaluate my cost and save on the same. Now, moving further, Azure offers you multiple supports and support services and support methods. One is a basic, which is free of cost, which does not cost anything, and it's available as a part of your Azure subscription. Another one is a developer one, trial and non-production environment based support, which is you can expect Microsoft to respond maybe 48 hours, 72 hours down the line. Standard support, 24 by 7 access, and standard support is a ticket which again will be responded within 48 to 72 hours. Professional direct support, which is for monthly $1,000, and the response time over there will be within 4 to 6 hours. And uh, then you have your premier support. Premier support is where you need to contact Microsoft for the pricing, and the uh, the charges for them are defined as a part of the contract or the agreement, and the response time for premier support is less than 2 hours. There are other support models apart from the Microsoft support itself. So you can go to developers forum or some other URLs wherein you can look up for help and support from Microsoft or any of the Microsoft delegates and resources. You have a Microsoft extensive Azure based knowledge center, which can help you to identify and get your queries or issues answered on its own, resolved on its own. Yeah. And these kind of services would be most frequently occurring issues. So most of the answers can be identified from there itself. You can open support request directly from the portal from any service. So I can scroll down here. I have an option for new support request, and it depends on what kind of a support request I want to open. I can define the basics and the solution that will be granted to me. Azure, select an issue type, technical issue, MSDN. This is my services. I can identify next. So all services next. Right. So you can select everything over here, and then database failure, problem type, performance and query execution, problem subtype. Next, you look up for solutions. Next, you look up for details, and then you can probably view the plan and raise a support ticket for the same. Once you have the support ticket and everything raised, you can get a response from Microsoft within the stipulated time, depending upon the plan that you are in. Azure service level agreements is something very critical to know, because it is the best possible cloud solution provider based SLA that is being provided. So SLA from Microsoft Azure is defined by default at three different layers. When Microsoft says 99.9%, it means 43.2 minutes of downtime per month, or 8.76 hours per year. 99.95% SLA means 21 minutes per month and 4 odd hours per year, and 99.99% is 4.32 minutes per month and 52 minutes per year. If the service fails to meet the guarantee, a percentage of the monthly service fee can be credited to you. Means if the SLA is breached, Microsoft will. There is something called as a composite SLA. Composite SLA is which comes into the picture when you have multiple products and solutions coming together, and an average composite SLA is obviously identified with the least percentage of the SLA. So it determines the SLA uptime percentage value for a particular application and calculates the application SLA percentage uptime based on the service that you are using. Just a minute, guys. So Azure service level agreements are something, guys, that we have covered in different aspects. Like Microsoft gives you as an individual SLA, also as a composite SLA, also, and as an SLA for multiple services together as well. And this SLA can be calculated directly on Microsoft's site as and when required. Service lifecycle. In Azure, the services that are available are not directly being given to the end customers. They are by default in private preview, then they come to the public preview. Private preview is where Azure features are available to certain esteemed customers who have been evaluating services aggressively, and public preview is the one that is available to us in the in preview for the end customers. So, as I told you over here in the Kubernetes, this particular component, just a minute, guys, this one. Yeah, so when you see this preview, this is public preview because I'm able to see them. Private preview is not available to each and every one of them. It is only available to specific users, specific customers who are evaluating services aggressively. So once you are evaluating those preview services and preview features, you should be able to easily evaluate the changes and the things that are being newly introduced, and based on which the components will vary. Lastly, you have the public preview then getting converted to general availability, wherein it is finally being made available to all the Azure customers, and Azure publicly, Microsoft announces that Azure is now having those features and services available with themselves. This brings us, guys, to an end of a complete walkthrough of each and every single module that we had to cover as a part of this particular refreshers session. Definitely, we have done this pretty early. Reason being that you guys are having this particular component, available to you, but only the issue is that you guys do not have the relevant hands-on to be taken. But a step-by-step guides with the notes will be shared with you post completion of this particular webinar to make sure that you guys have the right resources with you in place in order to prepare yourself for the examinations. Please let us now spend some time having some question and answers on whatever we have attended right now, and post completion of those question and answer we should be good to close the session, guys.